My uncle says it was different once. A long time back, sometimes pictures said things or even showed people. Your uncle said, your uncle said, your uncle must be a remarkable man. He certainly is. Well, I got to be going. Goodbye, Mr. Montag. Goodbye. Goodbye. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 days. The firehouse. Montag, you shin that pole like a bird up a tree. Third day. Montag, I see you came in the back door this time. The hound bother you? No, no. Fourth day. Montag, a funny thing heard tell this morning. Fireman in Seattle purposely set a mechanical hound to his own chemical complex and let it loose. What kind of suicide would you call that? 5, 6, 7 days. And then Clarice was gone. He didn't know what there was about the afternoon, but he was not seeing her somewhere in the world. The lawn was empty, the trees empty, the streets empty, and while at first he did not even know he missed her or was even looking for her, the fact was that by that time he reached the subway. There were vague stirrings of disease in him. Something was the matter. This routine had been disturbed, a simple routine, true, established in a short few days, and yet he almost turned back to make the walk again, to give her time to appear. He was certain if he tried the same route, everything would work out fine, but it was late, and the arrival of this train put a stop of his plan. The fluttered cards, motion of hands, of violets, the drone of the time voice in the firehouse ceiling. 1:35 Thursday morning, November 4th, 1:36, 1:37 a.m. The tick of the playing cards on the greasy table. All the sounds came to Montauk. Behind him, behind his closed eyes, behind the barrier he had momentarily erected. He could feel the firehouse full of glitter and shining silence, of brass colors, the colors of coins, of gold, of silver. The unseen men across the table were sagging on their carts, waiting. 1:45. The voice clock moaned out the cold hour of a cold morning of a still cold year. What's wrong, Montag? Montag opened his eyes. A radio bombed somewhere. War may be declared any hour. This country stands ready to defend its. The firehouse trembled as a great flight of jet planes whistled a single note across the black morning sky. Montag blinked. Beatty was looking at him as if he were a museum statue. At any moment, Betty might rise and walk about him, touching, exploring his guilt and self-consciousness. Guilt? What guilt was that? You're playing, Montag. Montag looked at these men, whose faces were sunburnt by 1,000 real and 10,000 imaginary fires, whose work flushed their cheeks and fevered their eyes. These men who looked steadily into their platinum igniter flames as they lit their eternal burning black pipes. They, under charcoal hair and scud-colored brows and bluish ash smeared cheeks, where they had shaven clothes, but their heritage showed. Montague started up, his mouth opened. Had he ever seen a fireman that didn't have black hair, black brows, a fire face, and a blue steel shaped but unshaped look? These men were all mirror images of himself, were all firemen picked. than for their looks, as well as their proclivities. Yes. The color of cinders and ash about them, and the continual smell of burning from their pipes. Captain Beatty, there, rising in thunderherds of tobacco smoke, Beatty opening a fresh tobacco pocket, crumpling crumpling the cellophane into a sound of fire. Montag looked at the cards in his own hands. I've been thinking about the fire last week, about the man whose library we fixed. What happened to him? They look him screaming off the asylum. He wasn't insane. Biddy arranged his cards quietly. Any man's insane who thinks he can fool the government and us. I've tried to imagine, said Montag, just how it will feel. I mean, to have firemen burn our houses and our books. We haven't any books, but if we did have some, you got some? Biddy blinked slowly. No! Montag gazed beyond them to the wall, with the typed lists of a million forbidden books. Their names leapt in fire, burning down the years under his axe and his hose, which sprayed not water but kerosene. No, but in his mind, a cool wind started up and blew out the ventilator grill at home, softly chilling his face. And again he saw himself in a green park talking to an old man, a very old man, and the wind from the park was cold, too. Montag hesitated. What, was it always like this? The firehouse our work? I mean, well, once upon a time. Once upon a time, Betty said. What kind of talk is that? Fool, thought Montag to himself. You'll give it away. At the last fire, a book of fairy tales, he glanced at a single line. I mean, he said, in the old days, before homes were completely fireproofed. Suddenly, it seemed a much younger voice was speaking for him. He opened his mouth, and it was Clarice McClellan, saying, "Didn't firemen prevent fires rather than stoke them up and then get them going? That's rich." Stoneman and Black drew forth their rule books, which also contained brief histories of the firemen of America, and laid them out where Montag though long familiar with them, might read. Established 1790 to burn English influenced books in the colonies, first fireman Benjamin Franklin. Rule 1. Answer the alarm quickly. Rule 2. Start the fire swiftly. Rule 3. Burn everything. Rule 4. Report back to firehouse immediately. Rule 5. Stand alert for other alarms. Everyone watched Montag. He didn't move. The alarm sounded. The bell is in the ceiling kicked itself 200 times. Suddenly there were 4 empty chairs. The cards fell in a fury of snow. The brass pole shivered. The men were gone. Montag sat in the chair below. The orange dragon coughed to life. Montag slid down the pole like a man in a dream. The mechanical hound leapt up in its kennel, its eyes all green flame. Montag, you forgot your helmet. He seized it off. The wall behind him ran, leapt, and they were off, the night wind hammering about their siren scream and their mighty metal thunder. It was flagging three-story house in an ancient part of the city, a century old if it was a day, but like all houses, it had been given a thin fireproof plastic sheath many years ago, and these preservative shall seem to be the only thing holding it in the sky. Here we are. The engine slammed to a stop. Biddy stoned the stone man, and Black ran up the sidewalk. Suddenly, odious and fart in their plump fireproof stickers, Montag followed. They crashed they crashed the front door and grabbed out the woman. Though she was not running, she was not trying to escape, she was only standing, waving from side to side, her eyes fixed up on the nothingness in the wall, as if they had struck her a terrible blow up the head. Her tongue was moving in her mouth, and her eyes seemed to be trying to remember something, and they remembered, and her tongue moved again. Play the man, Master Ridley. We shall this day light such a candle, by God's grace, in England, as I trust shall never be put out. Enough of that, said Biddy. Where are they? He slapped her face with amazing objectivity and repeated the question. The old woman's eyes came to a focus upon Biddy. You know where they are, or you wouldn't be here, she said. Stoneman held out the telephone alarm card with the complaint signed in telephone duplicate on the back. Have reason to suspect attic 11 number Elm City EB. That will be Mrs. Blake, my neighbor, said the woman, reading the initials. All right, man, let's get him. Next thing, they were up in musty blackness, swinging silver hatchers at doors that were after all unlocked, tumbling through like boys, all rollick and shout, "Hey!" A fountain of books sprang down upon Montag as he climbed, shutting up the sheer stairwell. How inconvenient! Always before it had been like snuffing candle. The police went first and adhesive tape the victim's mouth and bandaged him off into their glittering beetle cars. So when you arrived, you found an empty house. You weren't hurting anyone, you were hurting only your things. And since things really couldn't be hurt, since things felt nothing, and things don't scream or whimper, as this woman might begin to scream and cry out, there was nothing to taste your conscience later. You were simply cleaning up janitorial work, essentially. Everything to its proper place. Quick with the cursing. Who's gonna match? But now, tonight, someone had slipped. This woman was spoiling the ritual. The men were making too much noise, laughing, joking to cover the terrible, accusing silence below. She made the empty rooms roar with accusation and shake down the fine dust of guilt that was sucked in their nostrils as they plunged about. It was neither crooked or correct. Montag felt an immense irritation. She shouldn't be here on top of everything. Books bombarded his shoulder, his arms, his upturned face. A book lit almost obediently like a white pigeon in his hands, wings fluttering in the dim, wavering light. A page hung open, and it was like a snow feather, words delicately painted thereon. In all the rush and fervor, Monte had only an instant to read a line, but it blazed in his mind for the next minute, as if stamped there with fiery steel. Time has fallen asleep in the afternoon sunshine. He dropped the book. Immediately another fell into his arms. Montag up here. Montag's hand closed like a mouth, crushed the book with wild devotion, with an insanity of mindless to his chest. The men above were hurling shovelfuls of magazines into the dusty air. They fell like slaughtered birds, and the woman stood below like a small girl among the bodies. Montag had done nothing. His hand had done it all. His hand, with a brain of its own, with a conscience and a curiosity in each trembling finger, had turned thief. Now, it plunged the book back under his arm, pressed it tight to sweating armpit, rushed out empty, with a magician's flourish. Look here, innocent, look! He glazed, shaking at that white hand. He held it away out, as if he were far sighted. He held it close, as if he were blind. Montag, he jerked about. Don't stand there, idiot. The books lay like great mounds of fishes left dry. The men danced and slipped and fell over them. Titles glittered their golden eyes, falling gone. Kerosene! They pumped the gold fluid from the numeraled 451 things strapped to their shoulders. They coated each book. They pumped rooms full of it. They hurried downstairs, Montag staggering after them in the kerosene fumes. Come on, woman. The woman knelt among the books, touching the drenched leather and cardboard, reading the gilt titles with her fingers, while her eyes accused Montag. You can't ever have my books, she said. You know the law, said Biddy. Where's your common sense? None of those books agree with each other. You have been locked up here for years with a regular damned Tower of Babel. Snap out of it. The people in those books never lived. Come on, now. She shook her hand. The whole house is going up, said Biddy. The men walked clumsily to the door. They glanced back at Montag, who stood near the woman. You're not leaving here. You're not leaving her here, he protested. She won't come. Force, force her then. Biddy raised his hand, in which concealed the igniter. We're due back at the house. Besides, these fanatics always try suicides. The pattern's familiar. Montag placed his hands on the woman's elbow. You can come with me. No, she said. Thank you anyway. I'm counting to 10, said Biddy. One, two, please, Montag, said Montag. Go on, said the woman. Three, four. Here, Montag pulled at the woman. The woman replied quietly, I want to stay here. 5, 6. You can stop counting, she said. She opened the fingers of one hand slightly, and in the palm of the hand was a single slender object, an ordinary kitchen match. The sight of it rushed the men out and down away from the house. Captain Beatty, keeping his dignity, beaked slowly through the front door. His pink face burnt and shiny from a thousand fires and night excitements. God, thought Montag, how true. Always at night the alarms comes, never by day. Is it because fire is prettier by night? Because spectacle, more spectacle, a better show? The pink face of Biddy now showed the faintest panic in the door. The woman's hand twitched on the single matchstick. The fumes of kerosene bloomed up about her. Montag felt the hidden book pound like a heart against his chest. Gone, said the woman, and Montag felt himself back away, and away out the door. After Biddy down the steps, across the lawn, where the path of kerosene lay, like the track of some evil snail. On the front porch, where she had come to wait them quietly with her eyes, her quietness a condemnation. The woman stood motionless. Beatty flicked his fingers to spark the kerosene. He was too late, Monta gasped. The woman on the porch reached out with contempt to them all and struck the kitchen match against the railing. People ran out of the house, all down the street. They said nothing on their way back to the firehouse. Nobody looked at anyone else. Montauk sat in the front seat with Beatty and Black. They did not even smoke their pipes. They sat there looking out the front of the great salamander, and they turned a corner and went silently on. Master Ridley, said Montague at last. What? Said Biddy. She said, Master Ridley, she said some crazy thing when we came in the door. Play the man, she said, Master Ridley. Something, something, something. We shall this day light such candle by God's grace in England, as I trust shall never be put out, said Biddy. Stoneman glanced over at the captain, as did Montague startled. Biddy rubbed his chin. A man named Latimer said that to a man named Nicholas Ridley, as they were being burnt alive at Oxford for heresy on October 16, 1555. Montague and Stoneman went back at looking at the street as it moved under the engine's wheels. I'm full of bits and pieces, said Biddy. Most fire captains have to be sometimes. I surprise myself. Watch it, Stoneman. Stoneman braked the truck. Damn, said Biddy. You've gone right by the corner where we turned for the firehouse. Who is it? Who would it be? Said Montague, leaning back against the closed door in the dark. His wife said at last, Well, put on the light. I don't want the light. Come to bed. He heard her roll impatiently. The bed springs squealed. Are you drunk? She said. So it was the hand that started it all. He felt on the hand, and then the other worked his coat free and let it slump to the floor. He held his pants out into the abyss and let them fall into darkness. His hands, his hand, have, his hand had been infected, and soon it would be his arms. He could feel the poison working up his wrists and into his elbows and his shoulders, and then jump over from shoulder blade to shoulder blade like spark leaping a gap. His hands were ravenous, and his eyes were begging to feel hunger, as if they must look at something, anything, everything. His wife said, What are you doing? He balanced in the space with the book in his sweating cold fingers. I mean, later. Well, just don't stand there in the middle of the floor. He made a small sound. What? She asked. He made more soft sounds. He stumbled toward the bed and shoved the book clumsily under the cold pillow. He fell into bed, and his wife cried out, startled. He lay far across the room from her, on a winter island, separated by an empty sea. She talked to him for what seemed a long while, and she talked about this, and she talked about that, and it was only words, like the words he had heard once in a nursery at a friend's house. A 2-year-old child building word patterns, talking jargon, making pretty sounds in the air, but Montague said nothing, and after a long while, when he only made the small sounds, he felt her move in the room and come to his bed and stand over him and put her hand down to feel his cheek. He knew that when she pulled her hand away from his face, it was wet. Late in the night, he looked over at Mildred. she was awake. There was a tiny dance of melody in the air. Her seashell was stamped in her ear again, and she was listening to far people in far places, her eyes wide and staring at the fathoms of blackness above her in the ceiling. Wasn't there an old joke about the wife who talked so much on the telephone that her desperate husband ran out to the nearest store and teleported her to ask what was for dinner? Well, then why didn't he buy himself an audio seashell?